The divorce papers were still warm in her trembling hands when Richard Bennett told his wife of 12 years she wasn't classy enough for his image. But what he didn't know was that the overweight woman he'd just divorced to marry her own sister, his mistress Jessica, had inherited a $500 million estate from her grandmother just 3 hours earlier, a fortune that would have been his if he'd waited one more day. Richard had laughed when Jessica spat on his ex-wife's face during the signing, never imagining that the woman he mocked for not fitting into his corporate world had just become wealthier than every client he'd ever groveled before, never suspecting that his new bride, her own sister, had orchestrated this betrayal for years, and never dreaming that the wedding invitation he mockingly sent would become the stage for his complete destruction. But how did a marriage built on humiliation and sisterly betrayal crumble in a single moment? What had the divorced wife inherited beyond money that made her transformation so devastating? And why did the sister who stole her husband end up begging for mercy at her own wedding? The conference room smelled of leather and betrayal. Catherine Morrison sat across from the man she'd loved since college, watching him sign away their 12 years of marriage with the same flourish he used to endorse million-dollar deals. Her hands gripped the edge of the mahogany table, knuckles white against the polished wood, as the lawyer droned through the final terms of their dissolution. And Mrs. Morrison, Miss Morrison, agrees to relinquish all claims to the joint savings account, the investment portfolio, and the summer house in the Hamptons. The lawyer's voice was clinical, detached, as if he were reading a grocery list instead of dismantling a life. Catherine's phone buzzed in her purse. She ignored it. 3 times it buzzed. She ignored it again. Richard Bennett, he'd kept his name throughout their marriage, insisted she was the one who should change, though she'd refused. Leaned back in his chair with the satisfied smirk of a predator who'd cornered his prey. At 42, he was still handsome in that sharp corporate way that made women at cocktail parties lean in when he spoke. His salt and pepper hair was styled perfectly, his Tom Ford suit tailored to emphasize his athletic build. Maintained through early morning sessions with a personal trainer Catherine had paid for during the leaner years. "You know, Kathy," he said, and she flinched at the nickname she'd once loved, now weaponized. "This is really for the best. You have to see that. I've built something at Wellington Investments. I'm entertaining senators, hosting charity galas, rubbing elbows with people who shape this city. And you," he paused, his eyes traveling down her body with unconcealed disdain. "You're just not right for that world anymore. You've let yourself go. The weight, the frumpy clothes, that whole Earth Mother thing you've got going. It doesn't project the image I need." Catherine felt the familiar shame burn through her chest. She'd gained 70 pounds over the past 5 years, each pound a story of late-night ice cream after discovering his first affair, of comfort food after the second, of giving up after the third. The mirror had become her enemy, reflecting back a woman she barely recognized. Round face, thick arms, a body that seemed to expand with every disappointment. "I've given you everything," she whispered. "I worked 3 jobs to put you through business school. I believed in you when no one else did." "And I'm grateful," Richard said, but his tone suggested he was anything but. "That's why I'm being so generous. You're getting the old Honda, and I'm not asking you to pay back the money you borrowed from our joint account for your little book club nonsense. See, I can be magnanimous." The lawyer cleared his throat. "If both parties would just sign here, we can finalize." The door burst open. Jessica Morrison swept in like she owned the building, and Catherine's heart cracked open all over again. Her sister, her beautiful, willowy, perfectly maintained sister, wearing a white Chanel dress that probably cost more than Catherine's monthly rent, would be in whatever sad apartment she'd end up in. Jessica's blonde hair cascaded over her shoulders in those effortless waves that took 2 hours and a professional stylist to achieve, but looked natural. Her makeup was flawless, her body a testament to Pilates and deprivation, her smile sharp as a knife. "Am I late?" Jessica asked, though she clearly wasn't. She'd timed this moment, rehearsed it, Catherine realized. This was theater. "Right on time, baby," Richard said, standing to embrace her. They kissed, long and deep, Richard's hand sliding down to Jessica's perfectly sculpted waist, making sure Catherine saw every second of it. Catherine's phone buzzed again, and again. She pulled it out, if only to have something to look at besides the grotesque display in front of her. 7 missed calls from Foster and Associates, her grandmother's law firm. Her grandmother, Elizabeth Morrison, the woman who'd raised her after Catherine's parents died in a car crash when she was 8, the woman who'd been more mother than grandmother, who'd taught her to be kind, to be strong, to never let the world make her small. The woman who died 3 months ago, leaving a hole in Catherine's life that even Richard's betrayal couldn't match. "Oh, don't look so pathetic," Jessica said, finally breaking away from Richard. She walked over to Catherine, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor like a countdown to execution. "This was always going to happen. You had to know that, right? I mean, look at you. Look at him. Did you really think a man like Richard was going to stay with someone who can't even fit into normal clothes anymore?" Catherine stood, her chair scraping back. She was taller than Jessica, always had been, but her sister had a way of making her feel small. "You're my sister," Catherine said, and hated how her voice broke. "We shared a room growing up. I braided your hair before your first dance. I held you when Mom and Dad died. How could you—" "Oh, please," Jessica interrupted, rolling her eyes. "You always thought you were so special because Grandma Elizabeth liked you better. Poor little orphaned Catherine, so brave, so strong. Meanwhile, I was the pretty one, the one who actually had potential, but no one ever saw it because you sucked up all the attention with your sad story." "That's not, isn't it?" Jessica leaned in close. "Richard came to me 2 years ago. Did you know that? 2 years. He told me he couldn't stand looking at you anymore, that you'd become this needy, desperate thing that embarrassed him at company events. And you know what? I agreed. So we started meeting, in your bed sometimes while you were at your pathetic job at the library." The slap came before Catherine realized she'd moved. Her palm connected with Jessica's perfect cheek, the sound echoing in the conference room like a gunshot. For a moment, everything froze. Then Jessica's face transformed into something ugly, something Catherine had never seen before. Her sister drew back and spat, the saliva landing on Catherine's cheek, dripping down toward her collar. Richard laughed. It wasn't a chuckle or a snicker. It was a full belly laugh, the kind reserved for comedy shows and funny videos. He laughed at his wife, ex-wife, standing there with her sister's spit on her face, her world crumbling, her dignity in tatters. "Jesus, Kathy," he managed between laughs. "You really are pathetic. Did you actually think hitting her would change anything? Sign the papers. Take your Honda and whatever's left of your pride and go. Jessica and I are getting married next month, and frankly, we'd like to move on with our lives." Catherine's phone rang again. This time she answered it, if only to escape the room for a moment. "Miss Morrison," a man's voice clipped and professional. "This is Gerald Foster from Foster and Associates. We've been trying to reach you all day. It's urgent we speak about your grandmother's estate. The will has been finalized, and there are significant matters." "Not now," Catherine said. "Ms. Morrison, this really can't wait. Your grandmother's assets have been transferred to you as of 8 o'clock this morning, and the value is substantial. We're talking about—" "I said not now," Catherine hung up. She wiped the spit from her face with the back of her hand, picked up the pen, and signed her name on every line the lawyer indicated. Richard and Jessica watched with twin expressions of triumph, already imagining their future. The penthouse, the vacations, the life they'd build on the ruins of Catherine's marriage. "One more thing," Richard said as Catherine gathered her purse. "Jessica and I are getting married on the 20th, at the Grand Ballroom in the Ritz. Big affair, 300 guests, everyone who matters in this city, and we want you there." Catherine stopped. "I'm sorry, what?" "We want you at the wedding," Jessica repeated, her smile venomous. "It'll be good for you, you know? Closure. A chance to see that we're really happy, that this was the right choice for everyone. Plus, it'll show everyone that we're mature adults who can move past this little incident." "You want me," Catherine said slowly, "to watch you marry my husband." "Ex-husband," Richard corrected. "And yes, consider it your final gift to us. You always were good at sacrificing yourself for others, right? That's your whole thing." Catherine looked at them both. These people she'd loved, who'd loved her once, maybe, or at least she'd thought they had. She saw them clearly for the first time. Richard with his manufactured charm and hollow ambitions, Jessica with her beauty that would fade and her cruelty that wouldn't. Both of them so pleased with themselves, so certain they'd won. "I'll be there," Catherine heard herself say. Richard and Jessica exchanged glances, surprised but satisfied. "Wonderful," Jessica purred. "We'll make sure to save you a seat in the back. Wouldn't want you blocking anyone's view." Catherine walked out of the conference room, out of the building, into the harsh sunlight of a Manhattan afternoon. Her phone rang again immediately. This time she answered. "Miss Morrison?" Gerald Foster said, relief flooding his voice. "Thank goodness. I need you to come to our office immediately. Your grandmother's estate has been settled, and you're the sole beneficiary. The assets include the Morrison Family Trust, the real estate holdings in Manhattan, Connecticut, and Colorado, the stock portfolio, the art collection, and the liquid assets. In total, Ms. Morrison, you've inherited approximately $500 million. Catherine stopped walking. People flowed around her on the sidewalk, a river of humanity going about their ordinary days, while hers had just become extraordinary. "Say that again," she whispered. $500 million, Miss Morrison. Your grandmother was quite clear in her instructions. Everything goes to you. And there's a letter. She left you a letter. I think you should read it before we proceed with anything else." Catherine sat on a bench outside a coffee shop, her legs suddenly unable to hold her. $500 million. The number was incomprehensible. She'd been worried about making rent next month, about whether she could afford therapy to process this divorce, about finding a job that would cover her basic expenses now that Richard had cleaned out their joint account. She'd seen the transaction on her phone this morning. $87,000 transferred to his personal account, their entire savings, gone. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, she said. Gerald Foster's office was in a building she'd passed 1,000 times but never entered, the kind of place where doormen wore white gloves and the lobby had real marble, not the fake stuff. The lawyer himself was in his 60s, with kind eyes and a gentle manner that reminded her of her grandmother. "Catherine," he said, ushering her into a corner office with views of Central Park. "I'm so sorry for your loss. Elizabeth was an extraordinary woman. I handled her affairs for 30 years, and I can tell you, she was one of the sharpest people I've ever met." "I didn't know," Catherine said, sinking into a leather chair that probably cost more than her car. "I didn't know she had this much. She lived so simply. That little brownstone in Brooklyn, the same one she'd had since the 70s. She shopped at regular stores, clipped coupons. How?" "Your grandmother was the daughter of Morrison Steele," Gerald explained. "Her father made a fortune in the 40s and 50s. When he died, he left everything to her, but she chose to live modestly. She invested wisely, very wisely, and the portfolio grew exponentially over the decades. She could have lived like a queen, but that wasn't her way. She wanted to see who people really were, without the filter that money provides." He handed her a cream-colored envelope, her name written on it in her grandmother's elegant script. "She wrote this the day before she died," Gerald said softly. "She wanted you to read it alone." Catherine's hands shook as she opened it. "My dearest Catherine, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you now know what I've left you. Please don't feel guilty about the money. You deserve every penny and more. I've watched you these past few years. Watched that husband of yours chip away at your confidence. Watched your sister circle him like a vulture. I wanted to intervene so many times, but I knew you needed to find your own strength. Money can't buy that. Hardship can teach it, though, if you let it. I've seen how Richard looks at you now, with contempt. I've seen how Jessica undermines you at every family gathering, how she makes little comments about your weight, your clothes, your choices. They think I'm just a dotty old woman who doesn't notice these things, but I notice everything. You are worth 1,000 Richards, 100 Jessicas. You have kindness in your heart, real kindness, the kind that can't be faked. You have integrity. You have strength you don't even know about yet. This money is not just for security, though. God knows you'll have that now. It's also a tool. Use it wisely. Use it to become the woman I always knew you could be. Not for Richard, not to prove anything to Jessica, but for yourself. And Catherine, don't let them win. Don't let their cruelty make you cruel, but don't let their betrayal make you weak either. There's a difference between kindness and doormatism. Find that difference. I love you, my darling girl. I always have. Now go show the world who Catherine Morrison really is. All my love, Grandma Elizabeth Catherine read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face, smearing her mascara. Her grandmother had known. She'd known everything, and she'd waited, trusting Catherine to survive it. What happens now? She asked Gerald, folding the letter carefully. Now, he said, you decide what kind of life you want, and I help you build it. The next 3 weeks were a blur of meetings, paperwork, and decisions. Catherine moved into her grandmother's brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, which she now owned. The building was worth $12 million on its own, but it wasn't about the value. It was about the memories, the connection, the sense of being held even though her grandmother was gone. She hired a team, a financial advisor who'd been recommended by Gerald, a personal trainer who specialized in working with women recovering from trauma, a therapist who understood the complex grief of losing someone while simultaneously losing a marriage. She bought new clothes not to impress anyone, but because her old ones carried too many memories of being told she looked frumpy, too big, not classy enough. She didn't tell Richard or Jessica about the inheritance. Let them think she was scraping by, licking her wounds in some studio apartment in Queens. Let them feel superior. The wedding invitation arrived on cream cardstock with gold embossing. Mr. Richard Bennett and Ms. Jessica Morrison request the honor of your presence. Catherine studied it in her new kitchen, the one with the sub-zero refrigerator and the range that cost more than her old car, and she smiled. On the morning of the wedding, Catherine stood in front of her mirror and barely recognized herself. Not because she'd lost weight, though she had 25 pounds of stress and sadness and new commitment to herself, but because the woman looking back at her stood differently, taller, steadier. There was something in her eyes that hadn't been there 3 weeks ago. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, a custom-made dress in a deep emerald green that flattered her figure without apologizing for it, shoes by a designer she'd only ever read about, jewelry that was elegant without being ostentatious. Her makeup was perfect, done by a professional. Her hair, which she'd let grow during the marriage because Richard liked it long, was now cut in a sleek bob that made her neck look graceful, her face striking. But the real change wasn't in how she looked. It was in how she felt. The grand ballroom at the Ritz was everything Jessica had always dreamed of. Crystal chandeliers, white roses everywhere, a string quartet playing softly as guests arrived in their designer gowns and custom tuxedos. Catherine counted at least 5 people she recognized from Richard's company, partners, and senior associates who'd come to their apartment for dinner parties where she'd cooked and served and been patted on the head like a helpful pet. She entered just as the ceremony was beginning. Every head turned. She saw the moment Richard recognized her, watched his expression shift from confusion to shock to something that might have been fear. Jessica, standing at the altar in a Vera Wang gown that had probably cost $40,000, went pale under her makeup. Catherine walked down the center aisle, her heels clicking on the marble floor. She didn't hurry. She let them look, let them see, let them wonder. She chose a seat in the middle, not the back where they'd expected her to hide, but right where everyone could see her. The ceremony continued, but Catherine could feel the ripple of distraction spreading through the room. People were whispering, looking back at her, then at the bride and groom. Richard stumbled over his vows twice. Jessica's voice wavered when she said, "I do." The reception was even better. Catherine accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and made her way through the crowd. People gravitated toward her naturally, drawn by something they couldn't quite name. Confidence, maybe, or the aura that money gives, whether people know you have it or not. "Catherine Morrison?" A woman approached, elegant in her 60s. "I thought that was you. Though you look so different, I almost didn't recognize you. I'm Margaret Wellington, Richard's boss's wife. We met at last year's Christmas party." "Of course," Catherine said warmly. "How lovely to see you again." "I have to tell you," Margaret said, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "We were all shocked when we heard about the divorce. Richard told everyone you'd been having Difficulties. Mental health issues, he implied. Made it sound like you were quite unstable. Did he? Catherine kept her voice neutral. Yes, and then when we heard he was marrying your sister, Margaret shook her head. Well, it seemed terribly inappropriate. My husband was against even coming tonight, but Richard is one of our top earners, so we felt obligated. She paused. But you seem perfectly well. More than well, actually. You seem radiant. Thank you, Catherine said. I am well. Very well, actually. And that dress, is it Stella McCartney? Custom, Catherine said simply. More people joined them, drawn into the conversation. Catherine found herself at the center of a growing circle, discussing art, travel, the new exhibition at the Met. She mentioned casually that she was thinking of buying a place in Paris. Nothing too grand, just a pied-à-terre for when I visit. And watched eyes widen. Across the room, she saw Richard watching her, his jaw tight. Jessica clung to his arm, her smile frozen. Her eyes darting between Catherine and her new husband. The dinner was announced, and Catherine found her place card at a table in the far corner, next to the bathrooms. She picked it up, studied it, then walked calmly to the head table where the bride and groom sat with their immediate family. Excuse me, she said to the couple sitting in the seats of honor beside Richard and Jessica. I'm so sorry, but there's been a mistake with the seating. These are actually my seats. I don't think, the man began. No, she's right, Catherine said firmly. She gestured to a waiter. Could you help these lovely people find their correct table? It's number 12, I believe. The authority in her voice, the absolute certainty, made them move. People with real power recognize it in others, even when they can't explain why. The couple gathered their things and left, confused but compliant. Catherine sat down between Richard and an older man she didn't recognize. What the hell are you doing? Richard hissed. Sitting, Catherine said pleasantly. You invited me, remember? I'm just accepting your hospitality. Jessica leaned around Richard. You need to leave, now. This is our wedding. And you wanted me here, Catherine reminded her. For closure, you said. So I could see how happy you are. Well, I'm seeing it, and I must say it's quite the show. The older man beside her cleared his throat. I'm sorry, I don't believe we've met. I'm Robert Wellington, Richard's boss. Catherine turned to him with a smile that would have made her grandmother proud. Catherine Morrison. I'm Richard's first wife. Well, his only legal wife, I suppose, since the divorce was finalized just 3 weeks ago. Right before he and my sister here decided to celebrate their love in front of 300 witnesses. Robert's eyebrows rose. Morrison? Any relation to Elizabeth Morrison? She was my grandmother. I knew Elizabeth. Robert's face lit up. Brilliant woman. We served on several charity boards together. I was at her memorial service. I don't remember seeing you there. I was in the back, Catherine said, remembering. She'd been in the back while Jessica had sat in the front row, performing grief for a grandmother who'd tolerated her at best. It was a difficult time. Of course. I was very sorry to hear of her passing. She spoke of you often, you know, very proudly. Called you the light of her life. He paused. She left quite an estate, I understand. The family trust, all the Morrison holdings. Must be a tremendous responsibility. The table had gone silent. Richard's face was the color of old snow. It is, Catherine agreed, but I'm learning. I've hired Gerald Foster to help me manage things. Do you know him? Gerald? Of course. Top man in the city. If you've got Gerald, you're in excellent hands. Robert leaned in. You know, we should have lunch sometime. I'm always looking for investors for our charitable foundation, and with the Morrison portfolio behind you, well, you could make quite an impact. I'd like that, Catherine said. She pulled out her phone, a new one, the latest model, with a case that cost more than Richard's monthly car payment, and they exchanged numbers right there at the table while Richard and Jessica watched in horror. The speeches began. Jessica's maid of honor talked about true love conquering all. Richard's best man made jokes about marriage being the end of freedom. Catherine sat through it all with a serene smile, occasionally leaning over to whisper comments to Robert Wellington that made him chuckle. Then came Richard's speech, thanking everyone for coming, talking about finding his soulmate, about how sometimes life takes unexpected turns that lead to happiness. He was good at this, Catherine had to admit. Convincing, sincere sounding. She'd believed him for 12 years after all. When he finished, Catherine stood up. "I'd like to say something," she announced. The room fell silent. Jessica grabbed Richard's arm hard enough to leave marks. "Please," Richard said through clenched teeth. "This isn't—" "Oh, but you invited me," Catherine said. "You wanted me here, so let me contribute to this beautiful celebration." She raised her champagne glass. People around the room automatically raised theirs, conditioned by years of wedding protocol. "To Richard and Jessica," Catherine began, "it takes a special kind of courage to build a relationship the way you did. Sneaking around for 2 years, meeting in secret, lying to everyone who loved you. That's dedication." Nervous laughter rippled through the room. People weren't sure if this was humor or hostility. "Richard, you taught me so much during our marriage. You taught me that I wasn't classy enough, that I'd let myself go, that I was an embarrassment to you. You taught me that loyalty means nothing if there's something better on offer. And Jessica," Catherine turned to her sister, "you taught me that family bonds are just suggestions, really, guidelines that can be ignored if a man is handsome enough and successful enough." The laughter had died. The room was silent except for the distant sound of traffic outside. "But most importantly," Catherine continued, her voice clear and strong, "you both taught me exactly how much I was worth. And you know what? You were wrong. So very, very wrong." She pulled an envelope from her clutch, not as elegant as her grandmother's stationery, but close, and dropped it on the table in front of Richard. "That's a copy of my grandmother's will," she said, "executed the morning of our divorce. 8 o'clock, to be precise. 3 hours before you told me I wasn't classy enough for your image. 3 hours before Jessica spat on me and you laughed." Richard's hands shook as he picked up the envelope. "I inherited $500 million that morning," Catherine said conversationally. "The Morrison Family Trust, the real estate portfolio, the art collection, the stocks, all of it. If you'd waited one more day to divorce me, Richard, half of it would have been yours. Community property. You know how it works. You're the lawyer after all. Well, investment banker. Same difference." Jessica made a sound like a wounded animal. Richard had opened the envelope, was scanning the documents, his face going from white to gray to green. "But you were in such a hurry," Catherine continued. "So eager to upgrade to the newer model. So certain you were making the smart choice. And Jessica, you were so proud of yourself, weren't you? Stealing your sister's husband, moving into the life you thought you deserved." She looked around the room, at all these people in their expensive clothes, with their carefully cultivated networks and their judgments. "Here's what I've learned," she said. "Class isn't about weight or clothing or how well you fit into someone's corporate image. Class is about character. It's about keeping your promises. It's about not sleeping with your sister's husband while she's at work trying to pay off his business school loans. It's about not spitting on people when they're at their lowest. It's about not laughing at someone's pain." She set down her champagne glass, untouched. "So thank you both, truly, for teaching me what I'm worth, and for showing me exactly who you are. I hope you'll be very happy together. Though I have to warn you, Jessica, he cheated with you. He'll cheat on you. That's not bitterness. That's just pattern recognition." Catherine walked toward the exit, her heels echoing in the silent ballroom. Behind her, she heard the explosion beginning. Robert Wellington's voice raised in shock, other guests starting to whisper, then talk, then chatter, the dam of polite silence breaking. She was almost to the door when Jessica's voice rang out, shrill and desperate. "You can't just leave. You can't just drop that and walk away. This is my wedding." Catherine turned back one last time. Jessica was standing at the head table, her perfect makeup running, her Vera Wang gown suddenly looking like a costume. Richard sat frozen, the will still clutched in his hands, his dream of social climbing crumbling around him. Everyone in the room was staring at them now, and not with admiration. "Actually," Catherine said gently, "I can. Watch me." And she walked out into the Manhattan night, into her new life, into the future her grandmother had believed she deserved all along. Behind her, she heard Jessica burst into tears, heard Richard trying to explain, heard the murmur of scandal spreading like wildfire through the city's elite. She stood on the steps of the Ritz and breathed in the cool air. Her phone buzzed. Robert Wellington asking if she was free for coffee tomorrow. He wanted to discuss some opportunities. Another message from Gerald Foster, checking if she'd made a decision about the Paris property. A text from her new trainer, proud of her progress. Catherine smiled and hailed a cab. Not because she needed to, her new car and driver were waiting around the corner, but because she wanted to. Because she could choose. Because she was free. The fat wife Richard had divorced, the sister Jessica had betrayed, the woman they'd both thought they'd destroyed, she was gone. In her place was someone new, someone who knew her worth, someone who understood that the best revenge wasn't cruelty or spite, or even this perfectly orchestrated public humiliation, though that had been satisfying. The best revenge was living well, and Catherine Morrison intended to live extraordinarily well. 3 months later, Catherine sat in her grandmother's study, her study now, reviewing the proposals for the Elizabeth Morrison Foundation. She was funding scholarships for women going back to school, grants for domestic violence survivors, programs for financial literacy. The work was meaningful in a way her marriage never had been. Her phone rang. Jessica's number. It was the 14th time her sister had called this week. Catherine had blocked her after the wedding, but Jessica had found new numbers, created new email addresses, even shown up at the brownstone once before the doorman turned her away. On impulse, Catherine answered. "What do you want, Jessica?" "Please," her sister's voice was ragged, unfamiliar. "Please, I need help. Richard left me. He emptied our accounts and left. Said I'd ruined his career, that everyone in the city knows what we did, that he can't get hired anywhere now because of the scandal." "I have nothing, Catherine. The apartment was in his name. The car, everything. I have nothing." "You have what you stole," Catherine said calmly. "You have the memory of spitting on me. You have all those moments you felt superior. You have exactly what you deserve. I'm your sister." "No," Catherine said. "You were my sister. Then you made a choice. You chose a man over family. You chose cruelty over compassion. You chose wrong, Jessica, and these are the consequences." She hung up. Later she would wonder if she'd been too harsh, if she should have offered help, shown mercy, been the bigger person, but her grandmother's letter was framed on the wall in front of her. There's a difference between kindness and doormatism. Find that difference. She'd found it. Catherine Morrison, sole heir to the Morrison fortune, survivor of betrayal, rebuilt herself into someone her grandmother would be proud of, not because she wanted revenge, though the wedding speech would live in Manhattan social circles for years. Not because she wanted to prove anything to Richard or Jessica, though she'd certainly done that, but because she'd finally learned the most important lesson of all. Her worth wasn't determined by anyone else's opinion. Not her husband's, not her sister's, not society's. She was enough, exactly as she was, and the $500 million was just confirmation of what her grandmother had always known. She was extraordinary, and no one, not Richard with his superficial ambitions, not Jessica with her shallow beauty, not anyone, could take that away from her again. 5 years later, Catherine stood in the ballroom of the Morrison Center for Women's Empowerment, watching as 200 women celebrated their graduation from the Foundation's Business Accelerator program. The building had been a warehouse in Brooklyn when she'd bought it, but now it was a beacon, glass and light and possibility, with her grandmother's name carved in marble above the entrance. "Ms. Morrison?" A young woman approached, diploma clutched in her hand, eyes bright with tears. "I just wanted to thank you. 6 months ago, I was living in a shelter with my 2 kids, trying to figure out how to leave my husband. Now I'm starting my own catering business. Because of you. Because of this place." Catherine hugged her, the stranger who felt like family, and whispered, "Because of you. I just opened a door. You walked through it." She'd heard variations of this story hundreds of times now, and it never got old. The foundation had expanded beyond anything she'd initially imagined. Shelters in 3 states, job training programs, legal aid services, even a network of safe houses for women escaping abuse. The Morrison fortune was being spent the way her grandmother had always spent her own money, quietly, effectively, changing lives one person at a time. "Beautiful event," Robert Wellington said, appearing at her elbow with his wife Margaret. They'd become friends after the wedding debacle, the kind of friends who told uncomfortable truths and showed up when you needed them. Elizabeth would be so proud. "I hope so," Catherine said. "We know so," Margaret corrected. "She knew exactly what she was doing, leaving everything to you." Catherine had lost another 40 pounds over the years, not through deprivation, but through learning to care for herself the way she cared for others. She worked out because it made her feel strong. She ate well because it made her feel good. She dressed beautifully because she deserved beautiful things. But the number on the scale wasn't the transformation that mattered anymore. It was just a side effect of becoming whole. "Oh, before I forget," Robert said, pulling out his phone, "did you see the Times article this morning?" Catherine hadn't. She'd been too busy with last-minute preparations for the graduation ceremony. Robert pulled it up, handed her the phone. Business section, page 3. Wellington Investments. Founder announces retirement amid ongoing scandal. Richard Bennett, once a rising star at Wellington Investments, has quietly left the financial services industry after a series of professional setbacks. Sources close to the matter indicate Bennett has been unable to secure employment at any major firm following revelations about his personal conduct that surfaced 5 years ago at his wedding to Jessica Morrison, sister of philanthropist Catherine Morrison. Bennett and his wife Jessica divorced 18 months ago. He has since relocated to Phoenix, Arizona, where he reportedly works in insurance sales. Jessica Morrison could not be reached for comment, though public records indicate she filed for bankruptcy in 2023 and currently resides in a modest apartment in Newark, New Jersey. The scandal, which became known in Manhattan social circles as the wedding speech, effectively ended Bennett's career in high finance. "No one wants to work with someone who publicly humiliated his ex-wife and then got exposed for marrying her for money he thought she'd have," said one former colleague who spoke on a condition of anonymity. It showed a fundamental lack of character and judgment. In contrast, Catherine Morrison has become one of New York's most respected philanthropists. Catherine handed the phone back without finishing the article. She knew what it would say, the same things every article said now. The foundation, the impact, the transformation. They always mentioned Richard and Jessica, the infamous wedding, the inheritance. It was part of her story, but it wasn't her whole story anymore. "Do you ever hear from them?" Margaret asked gently. "Your sister?" "No," Catherine said. "Jessica stopped calling after about a year. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that she's working retail somewhere. She wanted me to give her money, obviously, but I didn't. Some people thought I should, that it would be the charitable thing to do." "And," Robert prompted, "and I learned that charity and enabling aren't the same thing. Jessica made her choices. She hurt me deliberately, cruelly, because she thought she could. Giving her money wouldn't teach her anything except that actions don't have consequences. So I didn't." Catherine paused. "But I did pay off my parents' grave markers. They were in disrepair, and despite everything, they were still her parents too. I did it for them, not for her." "That's the difference," Margaret said, squeezing her hand, "between revenge and boundaries. You never tried to destroy them. You just stopped letting them destroy you." A commotion at the entrance made them turn. Catherine's assistant, David, a efficient young man who managed her schedule with military precision, was hurrying toward her with an unusual expression on his face. "Ms. Morrison, there's someone here to see you. She says it's important. She says—" He hesitated. "She says she's your sister." Catherine's heart didn't race the way it might have once. She felt only a distant curiosity, like hearing about a character in a story she'd read long ago. "I'll handle it," she said. Jessica was standing in the lobby, and Catherine almost didn't recognize her. Her sister had aged in that hard way that comes from stress and cigarettes and too much sun. Her blonde hair was darker now, roots showing, and she was thin. Not fashionably thin like she'd been, but gaunt, hollow. She wore jeans and a sweatshirt, and the difference between them couldn't have been more stark. Catherine in her custom suit, Jessica in drugstore clothes. "Hello, Jessica," Catherine said. Her sister's eyes filled with tears. "Kathy, God, look at you. You're beautiful. You were always beautiful. I couldn't see it. I couldn't see anything but my own jealousy. Why are you here? I saw the article this morning about Richard, about this place, about everything you've built, and Jessica wiped her eyes. "I just needed to say I'm sorry, really sorry. Not because I want money or help or anything from you. I know I don't deserve that, but because you're my sister and I destroyed that, and I need you to know I understand what I did." Catherine studied her, the sister she'd loved, who'd shared her room and her secrets and her grief when their parents died. The sister who'd stolen her husband and spit in her face. Both versions were real. Both had existed. "Okay," Catherine said finally. "Okay?" Jessica looked confused. "I hear you. I accept your apology. It doesn't change what happened, and it doesn't mean we're going to have a relationship. But I believe you're sorry, and I forgive you. Not for you, for me, because I'm not carrying that weight anymore." "I don't expect anything." "Good," Catherine interrupted gently, "because I can't give you anything. The foundation has guidelines, programs for people who need help. If you want assistance, David can give you the information. You'd have to apply like anyone else, meet the requirements, do the work. I won't make exceptions, but the door is open if you want to walk through it yourself." Jessica nodded, tears streaming down her face. "That's more than I deserve." "Maybe," Catherine agreed, "but everyone deserves a chance to rebuild. Even you. I just can't be the one to do it for you." They stood there for a moment, these two women who'd once been everything to each other. Then Jessica nodded again, took the papers David offered, and left. Catherine watched her go and felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no pain. Just a quiet sense of closure, like finishing a book that had been left open for too long. That evening, Catherine sat in her grandmother's favorite chair, her favorite chair now, in the Brownstones' library. The room was filled with photos. Her grandmother at 20, fierce and beautiful. Her parents on their wedding day. Catherine herself at 8, gap-toothed and grinning. Her grandmother's arm around her shoulders. And new photos. Catherine with the first graduating class of the foundation. Catherine at the Met Gala, where she'd become a fixture on the benefit circuit, using her presence to raise millions for causes that mattered. Catherine with Robert and Margaret, with her team, with the life she'd built from the ashes of the one that had burned down. Her phone rang, a man's voice warm and familiar. "Hey," James said. "How'd the graduation go?" James, the architect she'd met 2 years ago when she was renovating one of the foundation's buildings. He was kind and funny and completely uninterested in her money. He'd asked her out 6 times before she'd finally said yes, gun-shy from Richard, afraid to trust anyone again. But James had been patient. He'd waited. And slowly, carefully, Catherine had learned that not everyone would hurt her. "It was beautiful," she said, smiling. "These women, James, you should see what they've accomplished." "I'd love to. Want to tell me about it over dinner?" "I'm thinking that Italian place you love. The one in the village? That sounds perfect." "Good. I'll pick you up in an hour." "And Catherine?" "Yes? I love you." She'd heard those words before, from Richard, and they'd been empty. But when James said them, they felt real, true, safe. "I love you too," she said, and meant it. After they hung up, Catherine walked to the window and looked out at Brooklyn, at the city lights spreading out like a constellation of possibilities. She thought about the girl she'd been, the one who'd believed she wasn't classy enough, wasn't thin enough, wasn't anything enough. The one who'd let others define her worth. That girl was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her value, who used her resources to help others find theirs, who'd learned that the best revenge wasn't cruelty. It was becoming so completely, utterly happy that the people who'd hurt you became irrelevant. Richard was selling insurance in Phoenix. Jessica was starting over in Newark. And Catherine was here in this beautiful brownstone, running a foundation that changed lives, loving a good man, living the life her grandmother had always known she deserved. She'd won. Not because they'd lost, but because she'd finally understood the game was never about them at all. It was always about her, about finding herself, claiming herself, becoming herself. And the woman she'd become? She was extraordinary, just like her grandmother had always said. Catherine Morrison smiled at her reflection in the darkening window, confident, strong, finally at peace, and went to get ready for dinner with a man who loved her for exactly who she was. The divorce that had broken her heart had rebuilt her life, and she wouldn't change a single thing.